In part 1, I left you on a cliffhanger. Although we went from ancient China all the way up to the time of Thomas Jefferson, I said that none of the people I discussed ever called themselves an anarchist. So, who is our mystery first anarchist? The first person to declare themselves publicly as such? Well, if you're a history buff, you may have noticed that the vast majority of the people that I listed all lived in the time of a certain revolution. And I don't mean the American one. So, as to our mystery anarchist, well, it should come as no surprise. He was French. The year is 1809. The day, 15th January. The place, Bessignon, France. On this day would be born Pierre Joseph Proudhon, and Pierre will become our first self-proclaimed anarchist. Pierre spends most of his childhood helping out with work at the family tavern. He receives no formal education, however, his mother does teach him to read and write, and has him spelling words by the age of 3. Until the age of 10, the only books that he is exposed to at home are the Gospels, some local almanacs, and the Four Sons of Iman. And despite spending their lives in poverty in 1820, Pierre's mother decides she wants to see him in college. So she scrapes together some money, makes some deals, and even gets a bursary, which knocks off 120 francs a year for his education. Despite this, Pierre is still unable to afford any books or shoes, which pisses off all the richer classmates that he has to deal with. But that doesn't really bother him, as he prefers to spend his free time in the library reading books, discovering new topics, and lamenting the fact that he has no one to discuss any intellectual or philosophical matters with. Probably because his classmates were still pissed off at him for not wearing shoes while he was in class. 7 years after entering college in 1827, Pierre moves to Baton and begins an apprenticeship in the printing house of Bellevaux. A year later, on Easter, he moves back to Bessignon and begins work at a printing house belonging to a classmate, Antoine Gauthier. Eventually, his apprenticeship raises him through the ranks up to corrections. He now proofreads everything that comes through the printing house, and it is mostly ecclesiastical writings. This leads him to question his Christian faith and eventually renounce it, before later in life returning to neo-Christianity. His work proofreading also brought him into contact with customers, including future close friend Gustave Philot, a fellow academic with whom he would finally have someone to discuss intellectual topics, including the works of Michel de Montaigne, François Rabelais, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Denis Diderot, and Voltaire. In 1829, Pierre would meet Charles Fourier, who we're going to take a moment and we're going to sidetrack to discuss him, because Charles is actually a really kind of cool guy. Not really. Charles is actually important in his own right. You see, Charles is credited with coining the term feminism in 1837. He believed that women were whole and individual people and not just a incomplete half of a human couple. He never married because he believed that traditional marriage was damaging to women's human rights. He believed that all important jobs should be open to women based off of skill and aptitude, not closed off due to gender. And Charles was ahead of his time. Before the term homosexual was coined, he was already writing that both men and women have a wide variety of sexual needs and preferences, and that they may change throughout their lives, including same-sex attraction and androgyny. He held that all sexual expressions should be enjoyed, so long as people are not abused, and that affirming one's difference could actually enhance social integration. Fourier stated that his main concern was to liberate every human being through education and by liberating human passion. But, once again, objectivity is the name of the game. So we bring out our clipboard. Because Fourier was also anti Semitic, with such banger quotes as, Jews are the leprosy and ruin of the body politic, criticizing the government for being weak and prostrate when confronted with what he called a secret and indissoluble league of Jews. He argued that Jewish people were disloyal and would not make good French citizens, and even put out a quote in his writing saying he confined himself to sitting down at table and drinking. He refused to eat any of the dishes because they were prepared by Christians. Christians have to be very patient to tolerate such impertinence. In the Jewish religion, it denotes a system of defiance and aversion for other sects. Now, does a sect which wishes to carry its hatred as far as the table of its protectors deserve to be protected? Yeah, he was kind of an asshole. But let's get back to our boy Pierre. With that drive that he showed early on for learning and experiencing new things, in 1840, Proudhon taught himself Latin in order to better publish books, and published his first work known as Qu'est-ce qu'est la propriété, or What is Property. This started his writing career, and the publication of the book gained him attention throughout the country and even across the Rhine River, including one such person who will be named later but will become very important. Before that, though, go into some ideas held and some quotes by Pierre. He believed that because anarchy strictly forbids any form of coercion, that it was the best definition of liberty. He believed in a stateless society without money that upheld freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly. He preferred workers' councils and associations, co ops, and individual worker peasant ownership over private ownership or the nationalization of lands and workplaces. He believed, most importantly, that social revolution could be achieved in a peaceful manner, that the only legitimate property is personal property and only earned wages should be recognized, meaning that all the tools and means of productions, including housing, clothing, food, tools, and blankets, belong to the workers by natural right, and the wages of their labors were there to do with as they please. And that anyone who made wage by legally owning, but neither occupying or working the land or trade, was an oppressor, which meant that rent, factory owners, shareholders, and any other form of money gained by a person by the labor or living of others was theft. They also attempted to create a national bank which would offer interest free loans, much like a credit union, to be funded by an ultimately doomed attempt of income tax on capitalists and shareholders. Now, did any of those beliefs sound familiar? Right. They should, because the person whose attention I mentioned he gained with the publication of his first book was none other than Karl Goddamn Marx. Yep, here he is again. And quotes from his publications include: "Whoever lays his hands on me to govern me is an usurper and a tyrant. I declare him my enemy. As man seeks justice and equality, so society seeks order and anarchy." And possibly my personal favorite, but one that I cannot read without these notes, and I'm going to have to get just the right amount of angry for. To be governed is to be watched, inspected, spied upon, directed, law driven, numbered, regulated, enrolled, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled, checked, estimated, valued, censured, commanded by creatures who have neither the right nor the wisdom nor the virtue to do so. To be governed is to be at every operation, at every transaction, noted, registered, counted, taxed, stamped, measured, numbered, assessed, licensed, authorized, admonished, prevented, forbidden, reformed, corrected, punished. It is under pretext of public utility and in the name of the general interest to be placed under contribution, drilled, fleeced, exploited, monopolized, extorted from, squeezed, hoaxed, robbed. Then, at the slightest resistance, the first word of complaint, be repressed, fined, vilified, harassed, hunted down, abused, clubbed, disarmed, bound, choked, imprisoned, judged, condemned, shot, deported, sacrificed, sold, betrayed, and to crown all, mocked, ridiculed, derided, outraged, dishonored. That is government. That is its justice. That is its morality. Sorry about that. Always gets a little exciting reading that one. Throughout his life, his experiences, his studies, his contact with these people and these major socialist figures have all shaped Proudhon's beliefs. Eventually, he coalesces them into a system that he calls mutualism. That's right, mutualism, the very same mutualism that anarchy would later go to adopt. And under the system of mutualism, Proudhon says there will no longer be nationality, no longer fatherland in the political sense of the word. They will mean only places of birth. Man, of whatever race or color he may be, is an inhabitant of the universe. Citizenship is everywhere an acquired right. Proudhon's theory of mutualism rejects the state, capitalism, and communism, calling for a cooperative society in which the free associations of individuals are linked to a decentralized federation based on a bank of the people that supplies workers with free credit. Why do I have the feeling this is not going to end well? In 1844, Proudhon meets yet another landmark person, this time in the form of Mikhail Alexandrovich Bakunin. Mikhail would go on to be known as the leading anarchist revolutionary of the 19th century. And after his death, mutualism would fracture into collectivist anarchism, individualist anarchism, anarcho communism, and anarcho syndicalism. And though his friendships with both Bakunin and Karl Marx would last a decent amount of time, they were not without their tensions. In 1847, Marx, who at this point had been consistently stating that Proudhon's beliefs and writings no longer reflected who he claimed to be, published a response to Proudhon's The Philosophy of Poverty, titled The Poverty of Philosophy, specifically so that Proudhon would know that he was pissing on his ideas. 1 year later, in 1848, would come an event that would shape Proudhon's future and the future of anarchy as a whole. What was this event? That would be the February Revolution. Remember, France has had, at this point, many, many revolutions. But this revolution is significant in the fact that it's one of the two that everybody mistakenly thinks Les Mis is about. That's right. If you're thinking of barricades and singing people, that's the June Rebellion. If you are thinking of beheadings and Marie Antoinette saying, if they will not eat bread, then let them eat cake, that's the revolution of 1789 to 1799, also known as the Reign of Terror. No, this is the February Revolution. This one took place February 22nd to February 24th. In just 3 days, these revolutionaries managed to storm a capital, take it over, dismantle the government, and then immediately install governments of their own, get that screwed over, and then ended up establishing the Second Empire. But they had good intentions, and seeing this, Proudhon decides then and there that it is his destiny to join Parliament. And from then on, he would refer to himself no longer as an anarchist, but as a federalist. Yep, that's right. Proudhon's not as cool as we thought he was in the first place. And in fact, I've been keeping a few of his much less cool opinions until this part. So you remember when he was touting that under mutualism, everyone would be considered a free and equal citizen, and that nationality would be gone, and that citizenship is an acquired right. It's basically you're born to a nation, you're of that nation, right? Well, there are two major groups that he did not believe that of. The first one is kind of ironic when you think of it. Remember how I mentioned that he was friends with Charles Fourier, the man who coined the term feminism? To put this in internet terms, if Fourier was the simp who believed that all women are goddesses, Proudhon was the asshole screaming from the corner, if she breathes, she a thought. An early work of Proudhon's, La pornocratie, ou les femmes dans le temps des modernes, or pornocracy, or women in modern times. And in a series of publications he simply called carnets, or notebooks, that went unpublished until the 1960s, he goes on about how because men have a greater assumed physical strength, then obviously the patriarchy was natural and enforceable. and included such quotes as, "A woman's choice is to be courtesan or housekeeper. To a woman, a man is a father, a chief, a master, above all, a master. A woman does not at all hate being used with violence, indeed, even being violated." These views had him under attack by libertarian communist Joseph de Jacques, calling him out on his bullshit and demanding, "Speak out of man's exploitation of women, or do not call yourself an anarchist." So how does a man like that become friends with Charles Fourier? Well, that's easy. Proudhon was also a raging anti-Semite. But this is getting a little long, and we have much, much, much more to go through. So I think I'll cut this one here, and in part 3, we shall go on about the revolution, the establishment of 3 communes that are very important, and perhaps one of my favorite additions, the symbols of anarchy. See you then.